Sorry, y'all get in the room, you get to see the chat here, so. Seem to be a way to among both, but I'll leave everything else up to Patrick.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Wardrop. I'm the executive. Thank you. I'm the executive director. I run the global engineering team at IBM for identity and access management. So my background is in identity and access management, access control, authentication, cryptography is really my background. I'm actually filling in for Bob Kelka. He was originally the speaker for this topic today. And what I'm going to take you through are 3 trends that we're seeing in IBM in the industry around cybersecurity and I'm going to take you through how organizations are or need to modernize in each one of these trends. The first one's around threat detection and response. Traditionally, that's just been detect and response. And a lot of organizations are still, have a long way to go in maturing in detect and response. A lot of companies start out with collecting, correlating, normalizing, and monitoring logs. We've called that SIEM, Security Information Event Management. And the problem with logs is not everything is captured in logs. And a lot of logs are, from the past, sometimes seconds, minutes, or even hours. So there's a bit of a delay in that data. And so companies have evolved and modernized to start looking at network flows. Network flows can give you a little bit more real time. They give you certainly more data than logs, but sometimes they're not contextual. Sometimes it's just raw data. And you have to break down that data. And just to give you an example, when you're looking at logs, you're looking at network flows. It's also important to look at user behavior. For example, if you have a subcontractor that typically downloads 3 confidential documents a week, and suddenly they're downloading 300 in an hour, that's an anomaly that you want to obviously detect and respond. And a lot of companies are starting to go from traditional on-prem to what we call, IBM likes to call hybrid cloud, right? Really what that means is on-prem, could be AWS, could be Azure. Typically, it's more than one cloud platform that they're using today that they have to start monitoring and start to handle responses from. And just so you know, these slides are meant to be a whiteboard, virtual whiteboard for people on Zoom. So I'm trying to illustrate here, moving up in the stack for modernization. You'll see that for each one of these bubbles. And the big thing about the detect side, it's really finding the needle in the needle stack, right? Being able to accurately find that data and to be able to respond to it. And on the response side, I have null set. A lot of companies today don't have an effective incident playbook. They usually actually start writing their playbooks when the incident first comes in. So I put null set. This is where a lot of companies start from. And to give you an example that I've personally witnessed is I run an identity and access management service. And so we support thousands of customers. And one thing that we see in identity and access management is credential stuffing. So I'm sure a lot of you in the room here know what credential stuffing is. Typically, it's an attacker or a group of attackers that buy IDs and passwords that have been known, at least in the past, to have been vulnerable or been pulled out of another company. And then what they do is they systematically go through those ID and password combinations to find, hopefully, passwords that a user's reused, right? We see those frequently. It's a pretty easy attack. And what they do is they take the IDs that they successfully log in with, and they either use that for further attacks or they sell that, right? And a lot of companies, when they first get a credential stuffing attack, they go into panic mode, they scramble around, sometimes even pointing fingers on how to resolve that playbook, right? What companies really need to do up front is to think through their attack surface, work out a playbook beforehand, and maybe even rehearse them, right? There's concepts of cyber ranges where you get a team of different roles in a company to kind of practice out and role play different scenarios, but it's incredibly important to have awareness. And awareness is not just for the cybersecurity professionals, really the whole organization. You need to have an education program in place. You need to be able to make everyone aware in every role, from the accounting all the way through to the SOC and response teams. The next thing is, once you have awareness and you have a rich set of playbooks, is companies really and organizations need to return to the automation. So to go a step back to that same example I'm going to keep reusing today around the credential stuffing, there's no reason why that playbook of execution, once detected, can't be automated. So typically with the credential stuffing, it comes from a small set of IP addresses that are running their scripts to go and type in the IDs and passwords. Also, too, the system can identify which IDs and passwords from those bad actor IPs were successful. So what would an example of a playbook be for that? The obvious one is to automatically block those IP addresses. I know that's not effective. They can rotate through. The other one is actually to reset those IDs and passwords. But the real thing is here, and I'm gonna get into it more, is really not just detect and response, because that's reactive. You want to be able to shift left, plan ahead. So for that credential stuffing playbook, really the other, the real medicine there is actually to have a better ID and password hygiene, right? Reset your user's password frequently. When the user logs in, have the user rotate through their passwords, have long password phrases, don't reuse passwords. And this is where the education comes in on awareness, right? And also maybe leverage things like you've been pawned or something like that, where users are logging into the system and checking their passwords doesn't match something that's been hacked before, or have their users type in passwords that are considered strong, right? Passphrase long enough, right? So there's ways you can prevent it if you're looking up ahead and thinking through it. But also there's gonna be times, especially in the consumer environment where you have consumer identities, where credential stuffings will be successful, and you need to have a playbook in place for that. So I mentioned shifting left. So to shift left, you need to be able to identify the different vectors of attack potentially for your environment. There's tools for that, but there's also sometimes even creativity, sitting down with the team, thinking through things, stepping back and saying, okay, I'm offering a internet-facing retail store, right? What are all the different ways that, and think like an attacker, right? All the different ways an attacker can come into that environment, right? They could, use an OADC or ROPC attack, right, with IDs and passwords. They can log into the single page application. So you got to think of different ways to be, instead of reactive, proactive. And there's lots of tools today. Analysts are getting really excited about attack service management products, ASMs, right? An attack service management product is constantly running reports and running scans against your organization to surface up sometimes things you already know, in a lot of cases, things you don't know, right? With different attack surfaces in your environment, it's inventorying those attack surfaces so you can step back and leverage that data to start putting a protect plan in place. There's lots of different ways you can protect. I gave that example around having better password hygiene in your organization, right? Having longer passwords. If a password has gone stale for a long period of time, maybe have the user go and reset that password. Or if the user's using passwords that are known to be vulnerable, I know most of you probably here use Gmail or Google. It will actually tell you if your password's been attacked in the past, right? Those are the sort of things that you can put into not just a workforce environment, but also for your consumers. But the other thing that a lot of companies have is endpoint protections, or EDRs. The problem with a lot of the EDRs, even the big EDRs, is they're not very stealthy, right? They run in the operating system. Malware and attackers can detect that. There's ways for them to circumvent that. So there needs to be protections put in place to be more stealthy, as well as protections for transactions, and obviously for initial logins when the user goes into the system. One way to help with that is the endpoint detections today, a lot of them use patterns and signatures to look for attacks. We got to start leveraging more machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to look for new strains that are coming in, right, in near real time. And to be able to automate those protections if something does get detected. And obviously kick off one of your automated responses. So just to highlight some tools out there today, I know I'm highlighting some of the ones that we offer. There's plenty of others out there. On the attack surface management, there's a product called Randori. There's plenty of other competitors out there today. Randori, though, is a fairly hot product. It provides that capability I said earlier around scanning through and continually reporting on potential attack surface areas in your portfolio. On the protect side, my background is IBM. We have a product called Verify for that. On the endpoint management, that to be more stealthy is really to move the endpoint management into the hypervisor stack. And we offer that React product for that capability and Mass 360 as well. And then to secure the transaction, you can take your IAM products, and there's plenty of different fraud detection products out there for transaction. We have a product called Trusteer, but it's really powerful though if you combine those two into one, right? Something that is looking at all the web transactions that are going through and doing a real-time risk analysis on those transactions. On the detect side, there's plenty of SIM products out there, QRadars being one of them. There's Splunk, there's Elastic Stack, and that's a way for you to collect all of your logs and to do network flows, user behavioral analytics, and to be able to do that across different cloud providers. I touched on this earlier around awareness. It's all about education. There's lots of different solutions around awareness. IBM offers a cyber range. I know other competitors do as well. And what a cyber range means in this context is really an environment to do role playing around different cybersecurity incidents and measure how your organization does that. It's not just the SOC, it's bringing in people from the CFO organization, people from the engineering teams, getting them all together to role play. It's really, really important to do that, because if you're getting into a serious issue, I remember the Log4j thing that came up at the end of, was it 2020 or 21, right at Christmas time, right? It was almost like someone planned that. I swear someone did plan that, right? Because there's a lot of teams that weren't equipped to handle that, right? You had to coordinate across, all different supply chains, everything to get and to execute and get those fixes out, right? But if a lot of companies sat down and did that cyber range or some sort of role playing, I can guarantee you that would have went a lot smoother for a lot of companies. Yep.
The other thing about the timing of that, a lot of companies were in change control lockdown, including ours.
It's true.
So you're having to escalate every single request, and then it was patch and repatch. And so it was a double.
And it was continuous. We had like 3 rounds of it, right? So not only a lot of the West was on holidays, right? You had to get sometimes even executives to come in because it was the end of the year lockdown in a lot of companies to be able to get those changes in place. And that, obviously that applied to SaaS as well as on-prem. And then on the automation side, a security orchestration and automation response product. We have what's called QRadar SOAR. And what that does is it helps the security analyst to be able to go through when they get an incident, to be able to have a workflow if they're doing it manually, but at least a workflow where they can have their investigation in one place. It helps them pull in things across different tools, and then hopefully ultimately helps them to automate all that. So this is the threat detect and response. Some of the trends that we're seeing, the shift left, which is vitally important. You really want to actually be proactive in an organization. A lot of organizations, like I said, are reactive, and a lot of them don't even have their incident response playbook in place for a lot of the common incidences. The next big trend is around open platforms we're seeing. When IBM merged or acquired Red Hat, we all became, at least in IBM, a lot more aware of open platforms. That's how Red Hat was built. And that's what, our portfolios are right now, are moving towards. So it's really important to select a product or solution that has an open platform. The big thing about an open platform is it gives you really three main advantages. It allows you to leverage what's there already, be able to plug in things a lot easier into the environment. In the case of our portfolio, we have over 700 different log connectors and log sources built on an open platform. We have out of the box 250 different automations. And the only way we're able to do that is to have an open platform that vendors can plug in. We can leverage older technology that we have, because a lot of the logs and log sources that exist today are going to be around for the next few decades, but also new log sources that are coming in that are, let's say, are cloud-based services, making it very easy to integrate. The second big thing about running on an open platform, in our case, it's a Red Hat OpenShift environment where it's actually running on. And the advantage of that is that it can run virtually anywhere, right? We have clients that are taking our services and running them on-prem bare metal, clients that are running them on AWS, on Azure, IBM Cloud, Google Cloud, doesn't matter where it is. It's a standardized container-based platform in a Kubernetes environment. And then the last thing that the really big major advantage we had is that once running on this open platform, it forced us to move away from monolithic product solutions, right? So now we have microservice Kubernetes-based services that are very lightweight to get, for example, let's say an IAM product or even a QRadar product. You don't have to deploy, gigabytes of data and manage this monolithic app. You can pick and choose features and capabilities and run them at, almost like a menu, right? Go through and even scale elastically based on load. So those are the three main important things around an open platform. The next thing it really does, I skipped ahead, is it helps by doing this, making it really easy to run, and helps a security analyst accelerate their job. And a lot of companies now, I've been touching the point on hybrid cloud, they're really running in many locations. They have multiple data centers. There's not too many large enterprises today that only run on one cloud platform. They all run on, you'll hear them talk about, they run on AWS, or they run on Azure, or they run on IBM clouds. And to do that effectively, especially for your detect and response bubbles over here, is, I guess the natural tendency would to think, okay, like I've done in the past, I've pulled all my logs into a central location. But when you're running in multiple locations in hybrid clouds, cloud providers, their business model isn't for data to go out, it's for data to come in. So by going to that natural tendency, not only does it take a very long time to move all that data, logs and network flows out of one cloud provider to potentially another centralized one, right? It also egress costs. A lot of people don't think about that until they're actually implementing this. AWS, Azure, IBM Cloud charges a premium for data to leave their clouds. So we had to come up with a solution, and some of our competitors have as well, is a federation model. Being able to, when an incident is detected, to be able to query these different cloud providers without all the data leaving, being able to have them distributed out, being able to do the analysis. And then when the security analyst on a single pane of glass is doing an investigation, in single clicks, they can go and they can investigate these different environments and pull that, just the bits of data needed for that investigation into a central location. And by doing that, instead of the security analyst going across, hundreds of different tools to be able to get that data, they can centrally look at that as on a single pane of glass during their investigation. They can automate those responses quickly and efficiently, and they can reduce their costs long-term. So there's no CFO that I've ever talked to that would want to have a continuous tax on egress, and it will cost millions of dollars for enterprise yearly to be able to pull that data out. So that's one thing to keep in mind. A lot of people don't think about that when they're implementing this in a hybrid cloud environment, the cost associated with that. And then by doing this federation model, The other advantage is it reduces the dwell time from when the problem's first detected to the actual response. Let me pause for a second. Is there any questions at all so far?
Yeah, had a couple. When you were talking about the identity management.
Yep.
I didn't hear MFA or.
I'm getting to that next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other one is with Log4j.
Yep.
A vast number of the instances of it were not being used by anybody, but they were in the environment still. And so that, from a hardening and pulling the excess code out, that would be a way to prevent those kinds of things in the future.
I definitely witnessed that myself. There's Log4j seemed to be bundled with every single
Everything.
open source. And then when teams went down and finally did their investigation, they knew that they could just remove that jar file, for example, just to give a Java-based app, right? And that never caused any problems because it wasn't actually leveraged. That's very true.
And the other one I wanted to ask about was API access. Their exposed API access often doesn't come with that front end that validates identity. What do you recommend on, from the identify side of APIs?
To identify those exposed APIs?
Well, you need to know what they are.
Yeah, but how do you protect the side of
How
it?
you protect those or alert for an attack on API?
Yeah, I mean, one of the solutions that we've had in place, and I've seen our competitors as well, is a no code solution, right? And typically that would be some sort of either proxy or a CDN that sits in front, like Akamai or Cloudflare, right? That's how I've personally seen them solved with my products and as well as our clients as well. It's a pretty low cost of entry point. And a lot of those products that are those reverse proxies, like we offer one, we offer actually a couple different ones. And the CDNs provide great protection on those APIs, right? They give you early detection. They actually will block bots. They'll provide for DDoS protection up front. There's all different things that they will provide, and very low cost to set up. There's you really don't have to do much code changes to get this in place.
Hey, Pat, you were talking about changing passwords on a regular cadence. I thought the NIST guidance had changed on that. And personally, I become sloppy and just angry.
So
with all those passwords wanting to be changed all the time. And so I will cheat.
I'll give you an example. Yeah, I misspoke there. So we have a large automotive company, and I've seen this in other industries as well, where they had IDs that were many years old that had never been logged in. So one of the remediation suggestions is to test out if those users still exist, is to reset their password and see if they log in again. Right. It wasn't like instructing the users to change them every 90 or 30 days, because as a consumer, that is not the recommendation for consumer facing. Right. It's irritating. Right.
Yeah.
But
never done an assessment where there aren't, people who've left the company who are still active users on the system.
Yeah. And this is a consumer side. So you'll see that. And, we have clients that have 20 and 30 million or even 100 million IDs, and there'll be a large population that's never logged in multiple years. So the suggestion would be is go through and reset those passwords and then monitor them over a couple months and see if they ever log in again. Right. Depending on, if it's an insurance business, they might only log in once a year. Right. So you got to look at the business to understand that. And just to highlight one tool that we offer for that federation model, it's called XDR Connect. So the next big one is the third big trend is around data protection. So data protection is not just the data, but it's also, I look at data on the access and identity side as well, right? So it's really that whole thing. It's the data that are in databases and user data itself that needs to be protected. A lot of companies and a lot of analysts are really excited about, zero trust, right? So what zero trust really provides is the ability to assertively and effectively protect your data, right? Especially with organizations. So a lot of organizations have had this cyber elephant lurking around in their environment. They've been on-prem for years. They've been hiding a lot of their issues. But when they started to move out of being on-prem, a lot of those things surface up, right? A lot of those problems surface up, and they really can't operate any longer like they did in the past. And what they need to do is to put in several controls. And I'm not going to talk, I'm going to give you more of an applied model here on how customers have actually done it today. So the first one in exposing your data or protecting your data when you start to evolve out of, being in the confines of on-prem is user rights. So, oh, I just lost my screen here. Sorry. PowerPoint is frozen on me. There we go. The most important thing is identity governance, right? Knowing what users have access to what. If you don't have that worked out up front, none of these other controls actually work. If you don't have control over what your entitlements are in your environment, who has access to what, and that's been around for, the governance side, probably 10, 15 years. Obviously, identity lifecycle management's been around for decades. The next one is privileged access management. Probably it really got hot after Sarbanes-Oxley, probably 15 plus years ago, right? And the concept behind that is knowing and managing privileged access to your environment. A lot of companies that we witness don't do that very well today. And if they do it, they still have pockets of areas in their infrastructure that they're not managing that. This is essential for getting the right user in the environment. So the last one is around identity analytics. And this really takes all the identity governance and privileged access and makes sense of it. And what I mean by that is it looks at the data and entitlements and will surface up potential things that are off. For example, it should surface up, why does this team have privilege to the entire environment when their job function is sales, right? Not to pick on the sales team, but identity analytics is essential, right? It's leveraging a lot of that machine learning and AI to surface up those needles in the needle stack, but on the identity and access management side. Next, on the right access is access management. If you don't have a strong access management solution, you're not going to be able to control the enforcement or the policies around the right user to the right access. And then to get to your MFA question earlier, the key thing here is adaptive authentication. Some people call it adaptive access. And that's what I call MFA++, right? Just slapping on MFA and every time a user logs in really isn't a user experience, certainly on the consumer side that you want. You want to be able to have what I call silent security, being able to evaluate each one of those transactions as they're coming in, leveraging, what were typically fraud engines, those algorithms, being able to look at how the user's navigating through the screens. Is this how they navigate through every day in the environment? Even measure, this is going to sound a little scary, but even their keystrokes, how error prone their keystrokes are over time, to take all of that data and then surface that back up and give a risk score in real time on every single transaction. This could be web, this could be API. And then tie in based on that risk level, what needs to happen? What are the actions if that risk level is elevated, right? MFA would certainly be one of them. And in the most extreme case, maybe even block, right? But there's different reasons not to block, because sometimes you can be giving away to your attacker that they're being monitored. But there's different actions that you can do, and then be able to have a policy-based solution for that. A lot of companies today, so there was one study done that for sensitive data for Identify here, that only 7 to 30% of companies were confident where their sensitive data is stored today. And if you reverse that, that's 70 to 93% of companies don't know where their sensitive data is. So if they don't know where their sensitive data is, then they got big problems. So the first thing is, for the right data, is to identify in your company or your organization all the sensitive data. And then, of course, it's protect, right? To be able to, once you know where that data is, how do you protect that? you have an effective access control policy, have database engines that are looking at, the access to that data and identify and control that. Only allow privileged users, don't always have functional IDs that the whole entire company has access to the password. There's different ways you can protect that. And then the other big one on right data is to be able to have a compliance program in place to be able to report up how well you're doing on user right data, to be able to automate that in a way that you can send to the auditors immediately. No, the administrator doesn't have access to this particular sensitive data, and I have proof of that, right? That's another very important thing on the right data. Now, for the right reason, I put null set again there. And a lot of companies, since they don't know where all their sensitive data is, it's hard for them to know the right reason, right? And this is where they're starting from today. They need to start doing, mature up into insider threat analysis. Look at risks of associating, if this user is accessing this data, is it the data that they typically access every day? Is this transaction from the user Mike connecting in? Usually Mike only connects in and does 3 or 4 database queries, and this is at the database level, right? Not at the application level. But then suddenly Mike has logged in at 3 o'clock in the morning and has downloaded 3K worth of data out of a database that Mike is normally not accessing. Surface that up, because most likely you have one of these other bubbles not correctly aligned, and that could quickly give you identification of an insider threat. And then the right reason across a multi-cloud environment, that gets very difficult, and you have to mature into that. So, I mean, just to highlight, to step back. So the right user, that's all around what user has access to what users have access to what, being able to have an effective management program, be able to have, recertification campaigns in there, to see if a user still needs to have access, have the manager approve that, have a identity analytics, not only to write reports, but make it easier for even managers to approve access. Some of you here, if you're managers today, you have a compliance program successful, you should be getting notified should the user Sally have access to the Salesforce application. But identity analytics tied into that, it would actually come in and would give the manager some hints. Hey, Sally is requesting access to this application. Your entire department already has access to that, right? Make it really easy for the managers to be able to have a successful right user, or surface it up. No one else in your department has access to that. The reverse, that application, you should really think about, should Sally have access to that sales application? And then the right access. This is obviously my big space, right? These two here. The adaptive access, that's a big one. To be able to look and marry your IAM system with your application, and in some cases even fraud systems that are out there today, is a very powerful tool. Some of the early adaptive access just did really simple risk analysis. Has the user access this app at a certain time of day? Just about anybody can do that. Or the impossible travel, right? Looking at an IP address, if they're 500 miles away an hour later, flag that, but really tie in different user behaviors around how they navigate on pages, keystrokes, make it a lot harder for the attacker. User right data, or the right data, the key thing here is identify. Like I said, that statistic, 7 to 30% of all organizations are confident. And there was one of our board of advisors, one of the customers in the room when that stat was first presented, said that probably the 7 to 30% are lying. So, right, so they're overconfident in their sensitive data. Thought that was pretty funny. So anyhow, yeah, identification is key. And then the right reason, insider threat is key, right? Be able to be looking and analyzing that in real time. So let me map some tools over this. Like I said, my portfolio on the IAM side is Verify and zSecure. And these are both a distributed and mainframe solution for this. Distributed meaning, running on Intel types of machines or a SaaS solution. Again, Over on adaptive access and access management, very similar story. On Right Data, one tool, market leading products called Guardium. And Guardium has been around for a long time, but has also modernized as well. It can protect up to 120 different databases or data sources. So it's not just the Oracles and the MySQLs, right? It's Snowflake and RDS and different cloud solutions as well that a lot of companies are modernizing into to support that hybrid cloud. And then last but not least, a new product that was just a new tool that was just launched called Guardian Insights leverages a lot of those 120 data source types to be able to do real-time analysis on database access or data source access to be able to surface up those insider risks across a hybrid cloud, or it can be even deployed on premise, right? So all these products, with the exception of some of the mainframes, run on an open platform, right? They can run anywhere. They can run on bare metal. They can run on native to AWS, Azure, wherever your organizations that you're supporting want to run this particular capabilities. And that was everything I wanted to cover today. I hope all of you learned something here today. I'm obviously going to be around for a little longer for questions, so happy to answer any questions at all.
So let's say thank you to Patrick. And if there's any questions, additional
There's a
questions?
chat question here.
Josh has a question here.
Okay.
So, Patrick, I gave a talk a number of years ago with Dan Cornell called The Magic of Symbiotic Security. I talked a little bit about this idea. I'm a little concerned that you guys have kind of locked into an IBM ecosystem. Are you guys able to consume data from other platforms? Are you guys able to give back to those platforms the data that's coming? And is this piece that you're talking about that connects all this stuff, is that something that's open source that anybody can use for their integration?
So I didn't do a very good job when I said open platform. That's consuming anything from anywhere.
Okay.
So we have lots of competitors that are writing in plugins. Like, for example, on my portfolio, on the Verify portfolio, right, we have our own native MFA, but companies have multiple different MFA solutions, right? So we have a open SDK concept that is open source, where, you know, we have a dual plugin, for example, right? So customers would be using dual for MFA, but they might even want to use our MFA out of the box, where they're really both of them. So really, yeah, absolutely. That open platform is all around making it easy for competitor products to plug in when necessary. Because not every, for example, in my portfolio, if you look at Verify, it's not always QRadar that we're integrating with, right? There's other competitors, there's Elastic, there's.
So I can download this platform today and start using it, and it doesn't cost me money to integrate all those pieces.
It won't cost you money to integrate those, no.
Okay.
If you want to, there's published SDKs for that. And especially on the SaaS
I guess
side.
what I'm wondering is this integration a product that you guys sell, or is this an open source thing that anybody can use?
So it's a combination of both. So the SDKs in some of the portfolios are open source to be able to plug in. Certainly the APIs are published.
But I have to purchase your product in order to do it.
No, you don't have to purchase the product to use the SDKs now.
You're just ahead of your time, Josh.
But yeah, the products themselves haven't been open source like Red Hat does.
Yeah, I get the fact that you have all the stuff that's around there. I guess the question is really around that bridge, the piece that connects them all together. But if that's something that I can download and I can leverage without having to spend money with you guys, is there any reason why I couldn't use this with all my other tools that aren't like it?
It would depend, right? So I know on my portfolio, I can talk that in depth on the Verify side. All of our products will definitely work with all of our competitors, from the MFA side to the reverse proxy side to the access control side. And then we have published SDKs that are open source SDKs that you can download and integrate for your mobile application, for example, that if you wanted to provide advanced MFA capabilities. To actually use those SDKs, you definitely don't have to purchase the product to go and try and use them. There's ways you can download trials. Certainly as an integrator, there's ways you can download and get, you know, different licenses around, appropriate licenses around that to be able to do that. You don't have to pay money to go and integrate across any of those products. I can say that for sure.
Thank you for the presentation. One of your slide, your slide mentioned about federation. Do you mean identity federation or some other federation?
So
On the-
identity federation, yeah, that's definitely covered under the verified portfolio.
Right.
But when I had federation at
Yeah.
the top, that was around federation for a security analyst. Being able to, when they're going through and doing their orchestration on figuring out, they have an incident. Okay, I'll give you an example. An incident comes in and it gets flagged that, there's a credential stuffing attack, right? Gets flagged, gets moved up into a workload. The security analyst has to go and investigate that. Where is it coming from? Where did those attackers go and attack? And what resources did they actually get out of the environment? To be able to effectively do that, if you have assets or workloads that are running in AWS, workloads that are running in Azure, that federation model will automatically connect to your assets and workloads in AWS, your assets in Azure, and federate that data back up into that single report.
So there are standard protocol of doing that?
No, there is not a standard protocol for doing that, right? We have to integrate into each one of those different cloud providers or have partners write plugins for those to be able to integrate those in. So unlike the web single sign-on standards, right? There's lots of standards around that, right back from SAML to OIDC to Federation, you name it, right? Those are all standards. I've personally been involved with writing some of those standards and doing interoperability. These particular here on the Federation side, no, there's a lot of those are API driven from each one of those cloud providers.
Thank you.
Yeah, now that you mentioned the cost to extract, how does the cost to extract compare to the cost to store data in the cloud?
Oh, it's a lot more expensive.
A lot more expensive. to
Yeah,
extract.
when I was looking it up recently, it's something like, don't quote me on this, I think it's like 3 cents to 8 cents a megabyte or something outgoing. It's very expensive. I know that when we've even moved, we support multiple different clouds for the products that I support. When we move even just between regions within AWS, they charge us a fortune for moving data around.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what the cost will be if you're pulling that back over the WAN, over the internet. It just skyrockets up. We avoid all that at all costs.
From the standpoint of SSH tunnels, there's a study that about 10% of the tunnels in large organizations, they have no idea who set it up or where it's connected.
I'm not surprised.
Right.
And so my question to you is, how do you deal with that from a incident detection and response?
I don't have a quick answer for that one. If I were to be doing it in my environment, obviously you'd have to be monitoring at like a firewall level to be able to first identify those tunnels. But yeah, I don't have a quick answer for that one. No, haven't had to deal with it myself.
I'll go you one better than that. Let's say that I'm not a regular user. I'm a system admin. Who's watching me?
Yeah.
That's where the privileged access should be in place.
My job is to dump entire data packs, move databases around, reset everything. And there's a lot of stuff going on there. There's a lot of opportunity for
Absolutely.
theft of data.
That's where
But that seems to not fall into any of these neat little categories.
Oh, sure, it did. That first one, privileged access management.
Okay, so I've got privilege to dump that volume, let's say. That's it.
So you go to access to, you have a privileged access system in place.
Yeah.
First thing is, obviously, you have to have the credential to be able to go and do that.
Yeah.
You'd have to typically check that out of a privileged access system. So you can have a report that, Mike went in and checked out that credential at this time.
Okay.
You can even take it further. They can actually do screen recording capabilities in that as well.
Okay.
So during that period of time that you've checked out that recording, your terminal screen has been recorded that entire time.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's ways to go back in time with an
Yeah.
effective system to know when someone did it, did they have the right credentials at the right time?
Okay.
You
Right?
can punish them, but not stop them.
Yeah.
It'd be very difficult to stop in that
Yeah.
case.
Right.
Correct,
It's
because the
after-
privileged user has to do their job too.
It's after the
Yes.
fact, I understand.
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
But to be able to report on it is important, right?
One other scenario, if your privileged users are using their laptop to access privileged actions, but their laptop is able to communicate to the internet and via email, isn't that a significant risk? Is there a solution to, give them the access they need, but without exposing the threats of live internet connections or email that could be.
Yeah, it would depend on how high value is, I guess, what they're accessing. I mean, if it was a very high value asset, you would lock down those systems that you'd have a jump server or something that they
Jump
have to
server?
connect to first before they connect to that
Okay.
asset.
Yeah.
There's different ways that I would solve that. I know I would require phishing resistant authentication from that tokens, potentially unsecured or less
Yeah.
secured laptop to connect to that jump server, then that jump server is locked down, right? So that connection to the jump server is secured with a phishing resistant authentication capability. And once they get on that jump server, it's a very, very controlled environment.
Constrained environment.
That's how I
all
would
the
solve it.
tools
And then that
authorized.
system there, that jump server is where all the privileged access activities happen.
Authorization happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
On the user behavior analytics, so are people starting to look at there's like software that moves my mouse now, so it looks like I'm working when I'm not. Like, are endpoint systems looking that far, or are they just, I mean, your example was Cogent, right? I download 3 a day, now it's 300, that's clearly a flag. Are they looking at sort of what people do on their desktop or how long they dwell on a web page, or because the the productivity software is doing that? I just don't know. if
I can definitely say that on the adaptive authentication or access side, it's happening today.
Okay.
Right? So there's ways to put in JavaScript into your single page application to be able to look at that type of activity. It is getting more restrictive over time, but it's definitely there. There's ways to do fairly effective, not perfect signatures on users, like what fonts they have installed, their screen resolution. Those can be faked out. But when it starts to look at when the user's typing in their password, the pauses between each character, their typical error rate, that's hard to fake out. Like I've seen some research on that. It's like in the high 90% effective on determining that's where the user is. Pretty scary, but it's really cool at the same time, right?
Okay, so it's kind of telling, well, here's what the logged in user looks like. Is that really who this person is?
Yeah, and there's other ways to do it that you don't even need stuff installed on the browser. Even just looking at access logs, how the user navigated around the screen, like start to think about when you go to log into your banking application,
Patterns.
you go through the same
yeah.
pattern each time. You have the same delays because you're human. You're clicking, going through and you're thinking, right? But once that behavior either speeds up or it's a different pattern, the risk is elevated for that one
Supposedly,
dimension.
or something, you're hitting every tab now or some
Exactly.
kind of weird thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, makes
Because a
sense.
bot will do it very quick. And obviously you can design bots to be slower, but yeah, those are the sort of things. And that doesn't have to have anything installed on the endpoint.
Do you see much use of, and I'll call it continuous monitoring of the human threat in the company?
Oh, for insider threats? Absolutely. That's where that user behavior analytics comes in. And then on the database side, the
So
insider
if you
threat.
actually look at like credit scores and.
Oh,
transactions.
background checks? Oh, yeah. So depending on the value, if ourselves or other organizations are having administrators coming in to administer a high valued application, they definitely should be doing background checks. And I know our company certainly looks at that.
Right, but it's a fair question, right? If someone had a foreclosure, and not that means you're a risk, but right, is anybody starting to look at things like that? To some degree, that's public, right? If you sell your house very quickly, or it's interesting.
But a lot of organizations are doing background checks. Certainly, when I've had to work with government high value things, there's a very, in all different countries, there's a very strict background check. You know, you've heard of security clearance and that sort of stuff. That's taken to the next level, but certainly that's what they do.
Always.
Yeah.
Can't you just?
Thanks, guys. Thanks, folks. Great after discussion. So,
And we'll be back in tonight.
next month for May. So thanks y'all for coming.
Thank
Have a good day, y'all.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.